Hey, folks, and welcome to the show. Long time coming. We have been, kind of fighting various inconveniences and illnesses and other bullshit for the last couple of months. So I am glad that we are finally back on track. So welcome, everybody. We got 16 people watching already. Joining us is our co-host, Pat. Pat, how's it going?
It's going good. How you doing, Gary?
I am beset by travails from all quarters.
It,
But we're
the,
making it. We're making the magic happen over here.
the
So
holidays for this podcast were like a, a
the
TTR
apocalypse.
a TTRPG campaign. So like well, play the disclaimer, and then we'll just talk.
Okay.
Role-playing games are conducted in a near infinite number of fictional genres, atmospheres, and narrative tones. Even if the game that you are running or playing has exactly the same genre and tone as some other game, its game master and players are different, and so its outcomes will be different. In RPGs, there are no universally correct solutions or even questions, because so much depends on any given group's approach and chemistry. Consideration of nuance is required. However, this is something the human species, the internet, and the hosts of this program frequently cannot achieve, despite their best efforts. Please forgive them all, and keep this in mind as you watch.
Anyway,
Thank you, Ian Malcolmson, for that. For
yes, our splendid disclaimer.
our splendid disclaimer, and I'll just tell everybody in the chat, right? If you have any questions as we go forward, we'll try to answer a few at the end. Write question in all caps, and then the question, and then like the last 10 minutes, we'll look at them. And if you do a super chat, Gary will do like a backflip and
That's
and,
true. Yeah.
and
This point.
a ballerina dance for,
Yeah.
for the money you give him, and we'll talk about it right away.
If it's enough, I might even put on a tutu.
Yes, this is a very unscripted show.
I'd have to go buy a tutu, admittedly, but we do what
We're
we
just
can.
we've kind of altered. And so anyway, back to my fantasy exploration campaign. I knew it was going to happen. I think we played once in early December, and then we didn't play again till like late January. It's the holidays just kill.
Yeah.
They just kill any sort of activity like that.
Yep. I mean, I screwed up my engagement numbers and all that, which I'm, kind of starting to recover from starting around the beginning at end of January, that is. So a lot of stuff happened. You had a bunch of stuff happen. I had a bunch of stuff happen. It's still happening. Other things come up, and anytime you every time you add a person to whatever it is you're doing, you're adding potential complications for scheduling, right? So anyway,
it is what it is.
it is what it is. We're back today, and hopefully we will not have a 10-month delay between now and the next one. So, but between now and the last one, we did have a bit of a hubbub about the open game license and D&D 6 and a whole bunch of other stuff that's going to have a lot of downstream impact, even where it stands today. So I figured we would start with that material. Now, the latest statement out of Wizards through D&D Beyond, I think, was on January 27th, and I don't believe we've heard any substantive news since. But they did follow through on releasing the D&D 5.1, I think, SRD into Creative Commons. That's great. That's nice, but I'm not sure that necessarily resolves the larger OGL questions that a lot of folks have, particularly for other products, many of which don't use D&D, aren't based on D&D rules, and have no obvious connection to D&D other than that somebody decided at some point it was a good idea to put out their thing under Wizards of the Coast 1.0A OGL. So right now, that's kind of my big question with what's going on with the OGL is, how does that affect a number of other publishers who released non-D&D games using non-D&D mechanics that have nothing to do with D&D under Wizards OGL? Now, at least in a couple cases, I'm pretty sure they can just tear that page out of the book and call themselves mission accomplished. Delta Green would be an example. I think they technically took a mechanical idea from the sanity rules, from something, but that's what I heard. That isn't a game I have, but I haven't actually looked at it very closely. Mongoose Publishing, of course, released both Traveler and an edition of RuneQuest now called Legacy, which they're those game systems, nothing to do with D&D, but which they released SRDs for them under Wizards of the Coast OGL.
Well, the problem D&D has had dating back to TSR is that, well, game systems
Hold
can't
on,
be
let me get a notebook out.
copyrighted.
Correct.
Okay, all right.
Mechanics cannot be
Right.
copyrighted.
So if you're not creating a unique IP, in other words, a unique fictional world,
Mhm.
if you're just a mishmash of fantasy tropes, okay, that date back to, what are dwarves, what are elves, dragons, etc. You follow what I'm saying? You don't really have anything you can truly call your intellectual property. You can copyright individual modules.
Mhm.
You can copyright art. If somebody puts out a game called or anything called the Isle of Dread, you may say, hey, I have something called the Isle of Dread. You may
But that's a trademark. Right.
correct. Trade. So we're talking trademark, and you can copyright art, and you can copyright specific things. But back to the original of all this, J.R.R. Tolkien's folks have no problem suing the crap out of people.
Mhm.
Okay, all right. Why? Because there's a unique. He created Middle Earth. He from the books are derived a unique setting, a unique place. Same thing goes for Traveler. Mark Miller has a unique setting, the Third Imperium. So that's it. I mean, the system itself is like how many times has the Traveler system changed over the years? A billion.
Oh God. Yeah, I mean, that depends how you want to number the games. Let me emphasize, folks. Maybe we needed another disclaimer for this. Neither of us are lawyers, nor are we your lawyers. This is not legal advice. If you would like legal advice, go consult your attorney.
Yeah, and my name is
but you're right. By the way,
my name is First, and I am Funky. Talking about like Seal also games. Yeah, they created Warhammer 40K. But the deal with them was this is a unique universe with that works in very specific ways. It's got its own legend, whatever. I don't like it. I've never played it. I've never enjoyed role playing it. Sorry, 40 Warhammer folks out there. If you dig it, you love it. But my point is, they own it. Okay, they have something they own. The problem with TSR, and it's carried over to WotC, is the milieu they're playing in. If you're talking a specific setting, if you're talking a specific published thing, like Dark Sun, okay, something like that. Well, yeah, they own that, but most of the fundamental underpinnings for the game, how do you copyright it, right?
Well, you can't. You can.
Right.
Well, the ideas can't be copyrighted. Only the expression of those ideas can be copyrighted.
Right.
Which is why that OGL, that one-page OGL that you see in the back of so many books, that is copyrighted. That is a written document that somebody wrote that in the TSR or Wizards of the Coast legal department. That's copyrighted. Copyright covers the expression of ideas. Ideas are not protected by copyright. You could protect an idea with a patent, but that has very seldom been attempted in gaming. And it has been by Wizards of the Coast attempted it once.
Yes. Actually. So this is one of the reasons I have consistently had very little sympathy for those who are now we're complaining about attempts to do things with the OGL. First of all, the OGL isn't really necessary. You could just go out and publish your own game. You could develop
you just got to write it yourself.
Right. You could write it my God, it could be a D20 system, all that stuff, like very, very similar. You just need to, one, to write your own system, and two, write your own stuff. The OGL from the beginning has been about, I want to write and basically publish my stuff as compatible with your game so I can get more sales.
So that's the compatibility license, though, which actually hasn't been around for a while. I think not since 3.5.
No. But I got you. I got you. They're all about different things. But my point is the OGL is making you then feel safe that I won't come later and sue you while I'm specifically saying compatible with Dungeons and Dragons, usable with Dungeons and right? And everybody got something out of it.
This is exactly the point.
Right. What WotC got out of it was they didn't want to create a bunch of settings. They didn't want to be in the module writing business like they were, it was determined that was what killed TSR previously with all the publishing. So you could let all these third-party people write modules. And develop settings, etc. You know, they were just going to kind of be like the brand holders. They like with 5.0, they've always had basically that what is it? Forgotten Realms derived setting thing. Yeah, you know, they've never gone that deeply with that. Sure, they've published some adventure threads, but the whole idea dating back to 3.0 and 3.5 was letting other people write that stuff up, not be in the land of publishing so much stuff like TSR did that it would kill you.
Yes.
Okay. And you know, so I guess my point is, well, you know, I just don't. I have patience for anybody out or sympathy for anybody out there who might lose their livelihood or how they're supporting themselves or anything like that, generally speaking. But you decided a long time ago that you were going to publish materials that were owned by a Hasbro.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I say, well, I've never trusted Hasbro my entire adult life, even before I was 18 years old. Why? What makes you think that if their business arrangements change, they're not going to come back at you and try to, like, you know, make they're going to be guided by what makes the most money?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, and then what the OGL did for, and I'm talking now specifically about people in the D&D space, right? Doing stuff that's basically compatible with whatever D&D, regardless of which version it is. It gave them comfort that they could publish this material and not get sued by Wizards of the Coast, and they needed that because nobody trusted Wizards of the Coast not to sue them, even if they did not have legal grounds to do so, which is absolutely 100% a thing that TSR did repeatedly. And they just ran the other party out of money. And that
Right.
Wizards of the Coast has actually been on the receiving end of back in the very early pre-Magic the Gathering days, right? From remember the Palladium Books lawsuit. So we have restricted Mr. Bozo, folks. So that is taken care of.
So one of the things that killed me about the about that very specific thing in this whole issue is like, so I've heard stuff. I've got a long memory in this hobby. So what's his name again? The guy who did the original OGL for 3.0
Oh,
or
Ryan
3.5?
Dancy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
he
the
was the
claim,
mastermind.
right? The claims by, and I think it's a good idea, and I understand what WotC was trying to accomplish and what they were trying to allow third-party publishers to do.
Mm-hmm.
But even his claims of like the OGL can't be revoked based on how we wrote it up. Nobody knows any of this stuff. Nobody's gone to court on any of this stuff.
That's true.
This is
Actually,
all.
this is
This
mm-hmm.
is all guy says. Guy
Mm-hmm.
says thing. This
Ryan
was our
Dancy,
intent.
also not your attorney.
Right. Right.
So, I mean, I believe him to be basically correct. And I believe what we're saying to be basically correct was you don't really need, unless you want to use the specific text out of the SRD, you never really needed the OGL in the first place. But that said, again, you know, there's a history of lawsuits, whether they have grounds to do so or not. And nobody trusted either TSR or Wizards of the Coast to be to do the right thing in any of these cases.
Well, forget even lawsuits. We could talk about like what if you were on Kickstarter and you were trying to sell a product and they just wanted to do a takedown.
Yeah, that's potentially true. You know, there's a whole bunch of legal shenanigans that could be done here if
we don't need to go to court over. I don't need to take you to court over. It's much cheaper for me to say, like, I'm WotC. These guys say they're doing a D&D thing, and I own the property. And OGL or no OGL, you know, like take it down. I own this brand.
Yes, but what the current crisis has done is remove that that cover, right? It's made it pretty clear, and if you read the most recent statement, in no sense have they backed off from the position, at least not from what they've said, that they can in fact revoke the OGL if they feel like it. So basically, what that means is that nobody is going to want to publish under that OGL, right? So we've seen a bunch of parallel efforts from Paizo and some other folks, and some of which are tied into Paizo. Mongoose says they're going to do their own open license of some kind. Nobody knows what that looks like yet. That's a sounds like a complicated multi-party set of negotiations, considering
And none of
they
these
themselves are licensees, right?
and none of these people had to do that. This is all, dare I say, I don't mean this in a politically oriented way, but this is virtue signaling marketing. Hey, we're open. We're publishing this. Buy my stuff, says Mongoose. And I love Mongoose, but this is all about, like, we're on the right side. We're on the right side. We're not those guys. As you and I just discussed, I don't need an open license. I could just write a game. You know what? If I don't want Mark Miller to sue me, I shouldn't use, like, Aslan.
Well, right.
Right.
So let's say though that you have, you go in, we'll pick a random game. Doesn't matter. We'll pick Lords of Creation, right? The old Avalon Hill RPG, which nobody would do. So that's owned by Hasbro now, as far as anybody can tell by it. So I go through Lords of Creation, rewrite the text, and maybe rename a few things, but it's exactly the same game. Maybe it makes changes to the setting, but change anything that might be considered trademarkable. So technically, I'm in the clear here, right? I have rewritten the text. It's my expression of the mechanical ideas, which aren't protected by copyright, and they haven't patented any of that stuff, even though they tried to patent it, turning cards sideways. Yes. But do I trust that that Hasbro, let's say Hasbro in this case, who actually, I don't know if those particular rights reside with the Wizards of the Coast end of Hasbro. That's a great question that we're not going to answer here today. Am I comfortable trying to then launch a business to publish that? And am I gonna feel safe in assuming that or Hasbro again is not going to just sue me because they can, and they have lawyers that are paid a salary, right, with basically nothing else to do until they run out of money, or I do, and I'm going to run out of money a lot sooner than Hasbro will. So I'll do what a variety of other parties in lawsuits against Hasbro, Wizards of the Coast, and TSR did in the past, which is that they end up settling. GDW did this with the Dangerous Journey, the absolutely ridiculous and groundless lawsuit against Gary Gygax. GDW ran out of money, ended up settling. I am told that was not a factor in Game Designers Workshop folding. And I actually believe that, considering the people that told me that. Let me put it that way.
Dude, if you have money and you think you have grounds, you can sue anybody.
Yes, exactly.
Okay?
You could sue anybody for anything, right?
Right. The OGL, and I see people, well, it's in the commons now. None of this is a contract. Okay?
Creative Commons is function, as is the OGL, right? It's a license. Which is a type of contract. The Creative Commons is a license, but the difference is not so much the specific term.
I can still sue you for brand infringement.
That's true.
Or I could still sue you for using IP.
That's true, but that's more work.
So unless the Creative Commons has the entire monster manual, right, and every D&D setting in it, which I know it doesn't, guess what? They can sue you. And in the world we live in, it doesn't even have to be about a lawsuit. Like I said,
there's other bullying tactics they can use.
You could be
without actually filing.
You could be doing a Kickstarter for a book, and I can just go and say, "Hi, I'm Pat from WotC, or from Hasbro, and this product that's out there we feel is in violation of our brand, and we are going to sue them. So we are doing a DCMI takedown request." Yeah. And they would take it down.
Yeah. YouTube will do the same thing, right?
Right.
We're going to put up a video that they wanted to, they didn't have legal grounds. It doesn't matter. They're just mad. They can file. But actually, the way it works with YouTube is anybody can do that.
Correct.
I've gotten copyright hits against videos initiated by people who do not own the copyright. Right.
I could do Pat at WotC at Pat WotC at gmail.com masquerade as a WotC employee and do that. Okay. Mm-hmm. That's happened. There are multiple cases of that sort of like vengeance. My point is merely that this was really originally about just providing third-party creators with a warm blanket to tell them, hey, we're not going to do what TSR did now that we bought them out and try to sue you.
And something I haven't heard Mr. Dancy or anybody else that was involved at the time admit, but they did admit it at the time. It was also about allowing the third party companies to do the types of material that didn't make Wizards of the Coast any money, like adventures.
Modules,
Yeah.
settings.
And
Right.
then they could concentrate on their what I will call splat books, whether they were individual title as a splat book or not, technically. But they were, added system bloat. And that
Correct.
became like their model, right? They would put out character books and monster books and blah 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 that generally people would buy.
Right.
Now they didn't do that many monster books.
Instead of Microsoft making every
Mhm.
bit of software you're going to need,
Mhm.
okay, Microsoft is going to make Windows and a bunch of core products, and then there are going to be these third-party creators out there who
Mhm.
are going to provide, who are going to create, this bloatware. Splat book is what, right?
Mhm.
That you're also going to get.
Plenty of third party publishers did that stuff too.
Right.
And
What
some
I've
of them did very well with it,
right.
actually.
But what's fascinating is they're both, like I said, they're both just in a tenuous situation.
Mhm.
WotC and Hasbro with D&D, we've done one or two videos that basically, when talking about fantasy and whatever, gets to the root of it. What is D&D? Is
Mhm.
it's not its own fantasy. It's this mishmashy thing, that you can, and you have, Gary, multiple times on these videos said it. Well, it's its own genre, but it really isn't. There's
It
nothing
is.
in there. Yeah, it is.
What is a genre but a collection of common tropes common to that genre?
I am again going to call bullshit and say it's like saying, well, it's part of fast food. Well, what the hell is that, right?
Well, maybe it is. The
It's
fast
nothing.
is a
It's
food.
not. It's nothing. We're beyond a beholder and some specific titles of modules you can copyright stuff. Everything else is just this blah. But you know what? I guarantee I can pick up some books by Larry Niven and say this stuff in here is copyrightable. If somebody publishes this, I can sue the crap out of
Right.
them. Okay, so that's the difference. Okay, so you have this mishmashy thing that's ill-defined that is nonetheless a thing that Hasbro sells and makes money off of, that it wants more brand consolidation on. And then you have third-party publishers out there who are afraid of being sued by these people who really don't own anything.
Yes, that's all essentially true. But the difference between this and, say, Larry Niven or Robert Jordan or whatever piece of written
But
work,
what they
right?
want is the ability to market and sell based on brand affiliation with those
Sure.
people who don't really own anything.
Right. But so the act of like reading or watching a movie or whatever, right? As you're just sitting there absorbing it, right? A role playing game is an inherently creative exercise, right? So
Sure.
the notion of you're going to create your own content for whatever it is you're playing, whether that's your character or things you want your character to do, or the game master and their world or whatever, is much closer to the ground in an RPG situation. So in a sense, um the we never needed any of this in the first place, which I think is where you're going.
Of course,
right?
I could run, you and I could be running a campaign now with 4 other players, you in it, right? And I could be running Chaosium's Ring World based on Larry Niven's,
Mhm.
known space universe, and I could come up with something inside that is like, we're not going to the ring. I've made up this thing, and this is what we're going to do, and it's you know what I mean? And that's a purely original creation by me, but nonetheless, we're not talking about that. We're talking about me then publishing that as a
Right,
supplement
for commercial use.
for commercial use, right? And the problem is it's set in Larry Niven's known space. My problem isn't even with Chaosium. My problem is eventually going to be with Larry Niven or his estate owning known space.
Larry's still around.
Right. Is Larry still around?
Yeah, Larry's still around.
Larry must be 90.
He's getting up there. I don't know, but he's still around. I saw a picture of him, a recent picture of him, actually.
Whereas if I developed a game system where I said, hey, they're going to be humans and they're going to be elves and they're going to be half elves and they're going to be orcs and, halfy things, kind of like I did almost to take like in my GURPS campaign, they're going to be these things called Pumal, right? The small peoples and all this stuff. I can do all that. And you know what? If I just design it originally like that, the only thing I would get from D&D, the only reason I would want an OGL, the only reason I would want any sort of protections is it's not really about that. It's I want the brand affiliation with them to sell and use their name so people buy more of my product.
Sure.
Because
Whether there's like a logo or something like that associated with that or not, or a platform, right? Like the DMs Guild,
Sure.
where you're selling through them, which may potentially give you a both wider and more focused audience for whatever material it is that you have. But they also take a cut, and I believe it to be a pretty substantial cut at that.
Right. So, so back to the one, it's like,
Isn't it great being an unpaid freelancer?
right. I think at the end of the day, I think they've hurt themselves.
Oh,
This
that's clear.
this is really about well, we'll see how it plays out. Because
There's a lot of details that remain up in the air.
Here's the two trains of thought I have. One is that Hasbro is very determined, regardless of what and then you have like these content creators who basically they all got YouTube channels, but they're all selling you 5.0 content as well, and they're all out. And I keep hearing this talk about a D&D community.
Their unpaid marketing department, you mean?
Yes, exactly. So those are the people who are most gravely hurt and threatened by this. Okay, but the bottom line is, if Hasbro has wanted to do brand consolidation, they're looking to I don't think people understand how integrated a VTT can be. They see themselves as leaving a lot of money on the table, and ultimately having this sort of relationship with third-party creators, they may not see as conducive to that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think they didn't want to kill their business immediately, but I think as they move forward, that's going to be their goal. And I think for the third-party creators, I would say, well, maybe you should get out of like the Hasbro business.
That's I think that's hard sell, right? To say, because there are people like Twitch streamers that stream, say, World of Warcraft or whatever. A lot of times when they migrate, they're like, "Hey, I'm sick of WoW. I'm not going to play it anymore." They migrate to another game, like half their audience leaves, right? And in this case, you'd be migrating to an audience that maybe is way smaller, right?
But they're not creating video content like you are. Okay, what they're doing is the video content is purely, it's not advertising for WotC, it's advertising for them, because what they're really doing is, like what Colville's doing. I am kickstartering products for 5th edition to sell them to you.
Well, and this
video I'm making is ancillary to that. It's marketing for that.
This is a portfolio for those creators. So there's like a number of different dimensions of this that we'll get to here. But let's focus on the dimension of how this impacts that pool of content creators that you're talking about, right? The problem is really a portfolio problem, right? If they are focused exclusively on D&D, which I'm happy to say I'm not focused on any one company or game or designer or whatever. So this doesn't affect me anyway, because that's not my audience. But for those people, this can be very damaging. I do think that a lot of them will pivot and recover. Whether that means pivoting to whatever D&D next thing, whatever they're calling it, looks like, or pivoting to a different game, Call of Cthulhu or whatever. I think a lot of them will manage to come out of this okay.
Well, in terms of video and audio creators, yes. In terms of third party, I'm talking about the creators who are essentially third party publishers.
Who are creating the publishers, that's a bit different.
Right. So to those people, I say, and I'll use it as an example, and you remember him from RPG Net and whatever, and I'm not like hammering this guy. I'm just using him as an example. But Matt Colville.
Sure.
You're a game designer. Design your own damn game.
Well, he's doing that now.
Right. Should have done that in the first place. Why didn't they do it? All these people didn't do it because there was a built-in ready audience. Why do that if I could just sell stuff to people who are playing D&D right now? Right? I don't have to have my game gain traction.
Maybe. Knowing Matt a little bit, I don't know that was his thought process, but that's certainly how it ends up. That's the
it's the end result.
The facts of the matter on the ground, right?
Right. Now, Yeah, you guys should probably all design your own damn games. You know, if you want to be in the, I certainly wouldn't want, you know, like, could Hasbro do this again? Of course they could do it again.
Of
They could do it
course.
tomorrow. They could
Of
change it
course.
tomorrow.
But
You are
if they do
essentially
this again, and probably the current decision makers there are not going to try this again, but 3 years from now, they're going to be completely different people, right? Because the people running it now will all have received their golden parachutes and are off to retirement in Cancun.
I am not convinced that the people who are doing
But
it now won't try it again later this year.
I don't believe that the current leadership, I don't believe that whoever made the decision, that might be Chris Cow, might be somebody else, I don't know. I don't believe that person will try it again. Now, Hasbro might come down and say, do it again. That's possible. But I don't think the current leadership team will have the stomach for it after this
The
mess.
current leadership team showed up from Microsoft Games.
Yeah, of course they did.
They're-
They want to turn it into a computer game.
Right,
don't
and they're
they?
gonna, and that's why I think
With
they
their
are
$30
absolutely
million virtual tabletop.
they will do it again in the next year. This is
Oh, that
about
they're good. That's not in question. Nobody
And-
thinks that's not the case.
right, and then they will do whatever they have to outside of the computer or
Mm-hmm.
technological realm to protect that property. Okay, so if they feel the need to like slit some throats over here or there, you know what I'm saying, in this paper TTRPG publishing thing, to make sure this thing succeeds, they'll do it.
Well, I mean, so if we were going to just like leave that up to the market and say, hey, Wizards of the Coast is working on this, tens of millions of dollars putting on this Unreal Engine driven virtual tabletop that is going to look like, for all intents and purposes, a full game
Sure.
masterable D&D video game. None of the people running other virtual tabletops are going to be able to be competitive with that.
Correct.
Right? The folks running, say, Foundry or Roll20 or whatever are literally running that out of a shed. Maybe not
Right.
literally, but metaphorically speaking.
Those people need to get out of the D&D business. That's my advice to them. Get out of the D&D VTT business.
Fantasy Grounds has been doing a lot with other publishers of late. I don't know if you've noticed that, but because they're doing a lot of stuff with Traveler, I have noticed that.
I use Foundry VTT for most of my GURP stuff.
Well, that is good integration with GURPS, though. That's a good reason for you to do that.
Right. But my point is, these guys have basically come out and said, our goal is to put you out of business. Our business plan is to put you out of business.
Yeah, but if they were coming in and saying, we're gonna come in and blow you away because our product is so awesome that everybody else is just going to get on board with whatever terms we want to give them or dictate to them, or they're going to go away and not bother us anymore. If that was going to be their position, I would have said, no, that's very bold. We'll see how that works. But no, I don't think anybody would have really had that much of a problem with that was going to say, we're going to outcompete you because our product is going to be that awesome. Okay, bring it. Everybody would have said, okay, cool, bring it.
But it never works that way. If I'm going to invest all sorts of R&D and and other development capital in a large venture designed to get me more money, yes, I want it to speak for itself, but it's not like this whole we're like roughly the same age, but you're closer to that millennial, we live in this internet at this age of competing ideas. There's no competing ideas. You invest in that and you hope that this thing succeeds. Then you do everything you can to pummel the competition to make sure that your product makes as much money as it possibly can.
All legal avenues that you can employ. Absolutely. That is, in fact, the world we live in. You're absolutely right. There's no, we are not living in the abstract Adam Smith world of gentle capitalism here.
Correct. So these guys, it is no surprise. That's why I'm saying, hey, Roll20, I would get out of the D&D business. These guys have stated basically that their goal is to put you out of the D&D business. I would find another business besides the D&D business to be in.
I agree that's optimal, but that whatever new business they want to migrate to might have a lot less money, money-making potential than what they're trying to do right now. However, the thing is that, if this is like a move intended to squelch competition by Wizards of the Coast, which I think is very easy to take it that way, what competition do they have? I mean, there's half a dozen publishers that are like OGL publishers that are doing D&D or D&D adjacent stuff, and I'm counting like Pathfinder and the OGL people and all that. Of all that pool of publishers, there's what, like 6 of them that aren't people in a garage? I mean, seriously, other than Paizo and just a small number, AIM-CDM maybe has what, half a dozen, 10 employees. I mean, but they do have, Matt does actually have employees now, so he is officially a big shot. But the pool of like actual like money making enterprises where people are living off this income is really, really small. And even those are dwarfed by the amount of revenue that Wizards of the Coast is bringing in from D&D today. So, with the possible exception of Paizo, and I think D&D has picked up a lot of steam in competition with Paizo since 5th edition, because 4th edition nobody liked.
Gary, I am very happy that you have made, I'm using you as an example of one of these 30-party publishers, that you have made so much, you have made a good living making barrels for Standard Oil in the state of Texas. Okay. But Standard Oil has basically bought all the other barrel makers in the country. Okay. And is by putting them out of business because they want to make those barrels. I would get out of the making barrels for Standard Oil business.
That would be optimal. So it's easy to say that, though, because neither of us are in this position, right? We could sit back with relaxed air and say, this does not affect me personally at all. And personally, it doesn't.
Personally, It doesn't affect me. I don't play Dungeons and Dragons. I gave up on it a billion years ago.
This isn't going to kill tabletop RPGs.
Right.
It's going to be damaging to a lot of people that are publishing in that space, but
correct.
And I will feel bad for those folks.
Right.
But it doesn't affect me. I could just be very detached about this. But it's also very easy to say, go find a different business. And they might, but that go find a different business might be, I'm going to go start making barrels instead of making D&D product, because I cannot make the same amount if I'm trying to make a living off of it. I cannot make the same amount of money making third-party Call of Cthulhu stuff or third-party Pathfinder, or maybe I don't know what the numbers look.
So I will say
maybe they can, and I hope they can.
I will say 2 things. A year ago, I didn't say go do something else. Okay, I'm saying it now because these guys have come out and told you that their goal is to put you out of business. Okay.
Yeah.
So when they've done that, you might want to consider making your own role, like we said. Finding other things, but not basically selling barrels to Standard Oil. So that's number 1. My number 2 point is, as you all know, any TTRPG cognizant people in the audience know, for the last 5-10 years, whenever discussions would come up and people would be like, hey, can I get some advice about how to play? Like, I want to do a science fiction game that's kind of like more like a hard science fiction, but how can I hack the D20 D&D system to do that? Right? And then you would just come out and say like, well, there's a couple of other really good other systems out there and some settings already made for them that might be better suited for that. And you would come out and express that on a forum or on Twitter or wherever, whatever. And then 8 to 10 people would jump at you and start beating on you and calling you a gatekeeper, which we'll talk about that word in a second. I'm going to get to that in war games in a little bit here, a little Twitter convo you were having with our friend at the Player's Aid later. But they would come out and start calling people gatekeepers. Well, you know who these people were? These third-party publishers who had every vested interest in trying to get you to buy a D&D brand affiliated product, okay, based on their OGL, who they then turned on like 4 months ago and started calling the devil, okay? So that's a part of me that has very little sympathy for a lot of those people, because really their interest has been on keeping the D20 5.0 derived hack brand alive as long as possible.
So let me address this a little bit, because this is actually part of several conversations that touch on this exact topic that occurred on Twitter over the last week or two that I was involved in, and you were too, in at least one of them. So on the one hand, you have somebody that's asking a relatively specific question, right? And if you answer them politely, then I don't think it's really a problem. What I get annoyed by, though, is, and this happens equally with people with a business interest because they're trying to sell you something, or just clueless people who say, oh no, you should clearly play D&D instead. I mean, somebody that says, exact conversation that happened. I don't like D&D. What's a good science fiction game?
D&D.
Oh, well, you should go play Stars Without Number, which is fucking D&D in space. It's got some great ideas in it. It's fucking D&D in space. That's what it is. And that's super annoying. And I've been seeing that for years in wargaming. I see that in RPGs. I see it in video games. They're all over. Just show some cognizance of you're stepping into a conversation with another actual person here, and don't be a douche. Okay, this is different from gatekeeping, but there's a Venn diagram here.
Well, my point here is, as you well know, because you've been around these conversations long enough.
Oh, Jesus, have I?
When you come out and say back, look, you're going to have to do a lot of hack work. D&D isn't built to do what you're talking about, like basic things, right? It's not a skill-based game, yet,
right.
All that sort of stuff, right? And you point that out. That's when the 5.0 defenders, right, who are all the third-party publishers who are now complaining that Hasbro was, trying to make them live in the poorhouse for the rest of their lives. Those are the people who would come out and then call you a gatekeeper for pointing out that it's not a skill-based system. It might not be the best fit for what you're enunciating, guy on internet, to me about playing this game. Okay.
This is a strictly mechanical matter as far as I'm concerned. And I am happy to say that I think D&D, whatever edition of D&D you want, doesn't matter. D&D is pretty good at doing D&D. It's built for that. It's built to do D&D. It's pretty good at it. They have fine-tuned it quite a bit over the years. I don't care which version you like, whether it's Medstar or Moldvay or 5e or 4e. I don't care. It's pretty good at that. That doesn't mean it's good at other stuff.
Correct.
This is strictly a mechanical matter as far as I'm concerned.
Traveler is great, different versions, but basically Traveler's great at Traveler. Traveler's not great at playing other genres. Traveler's, in fact, not even that great based on its basic construction in running a theme campaign in the Traveler universe.
Depends on the theme.
Before,
but
right?
There are certainly things that it fits a lot less comfortably.
Because of the character generation system.
And there are various attempts that you'll be aware of to make like a Traveler fantasy game, right? And I've seen a couple of them, and I'm like, I really kind of respect what these folks are trying to do here. And I'm just not sure I'm seeing it work or make sense, right?
GURPS is, for instance, is good at doing a lot of different, not everything, but a lot of different things. Problem with GURPS is you kind of have to be your own ludographer in terms of like shaving stuff off and choosing what you're going to use and doing all the nug work and the leg work.
Yeah, that's true. And I think they could do a better job at kind of consolidating the system in a way that shows you how simple the core of the system actually is. And the current rule books don't do that very well.
And they've tried, but it's not about that. People shy away from it basically because they're so
complicated.
Well, they're just like, I ain't got time. It's not, but the complicated isn't that the system is complicated. The complicated is like, I don't want to do that work. Well, I want to be able to sit down and I want to sit down and DM or GM whatever the thing is, and I want to be able to do it with maybe like 3 days prep reading. Okay, get my players down there. A lot of people, and these people need to be able to make their characters in a half an hour, and then we'll get started.
Well, like I can understand.
Like when you were playing in your last 5.0 campaign, with a friend of yours was running it.
Wasn't it I have played a couple of one-shots of 5th edition, but that's it.
You were playing locally before you moved. You mentioned it, and it sounded like the typical, you got to do.
Oh, that was ages ago, and that wasn't D&D. Okay. We actually, when I dropped out of that, we were playing 3.5 actually.
But anyway, back to the one. Yeah, I just be Matt Colville. Make your own game. It's not that hard.
And Matt has seen a million games.
Not that hard.
Matt is not. There is a certain certain category of folks that just haven't seen any other games. Right? D&D is their comfort zone. That's where they're comfortable in. They don't really know what's going on in the TTRPG space outside of D&D, and that's fine. That's an opportunity if you ask me. Matt's not. Colville's not one of those people. Okay, Matt's been around forever. He's worked for a bunch of different RPG publishers. He worked on the old Dune RPG from Last Unicorn, and a pile of other stuff. So I'm under no illusions about that. I think Matt just decided hey, I want to get back into TTRPGs because I don't know, I'm speaking for him, Matt. If you ever see this, and you won't, feel free to correct me. But I think he just decided, and I can sympathize with this decision too, being aware of the bigger space of TTRPGs, and just saying, fuck it, I'm just gonna do D&D because it's
Right.
easier. I have decades of support material from the past and gigabits of support material from right now.
I'm
I
running
have
a.
the
I'm
biggest possible pool of players. I have
I'm
name recognition, so
I'm
I
running
can go to the office and say, "Hey, IT department, maybe want to play in my Dungeons and
exactly.
Dragons game," and
Exactly.
people will know what the hell you're talking about.
Correct. And then you play with them, and you're just doing it for fun. Yeah,
Oh, sure.
right. I this GURPS fantasy campaign I've been working on, been a lot of work. I'm doing it for fun though.
Mhm.
I did it because I'm like, I wanted to run something this way, and I wanted the freedom to not have to like hammer things into D&D's rule set.
Mhm.
If I want magic to work in 6 different ways,
This
I
is
can make it
actually
work that way. You know?
been, I think, traditionally one of the not often highlighted, but biggest virtues of D&D as a RPG that appeals to people is that you can run it with essentially no preparation. You could play it knowing nothing about the rules. They'll sit you down, make a character, you'll make some rolls, pick a class, pick a race, pick maybe a couple other things depending on what version. In some versions of D&D, it is that simple. You roll dice 6 times, pick a race, pick a class, and you're done,
Right.
right? That's not, GURPS is not that, right? Other games have taken a lot longer to get there because they have not traditionally had the breadth of support material. Very few other systems have, frankly. Call of Cthulhu is one though. There's always been a lot of great support, both from Chaosium and from third-party publishers for Call of Cthulhu. But that's
All
an exception.
all you really need in this is basically what I haven't enjoyed about D&D for years is what you need is a good setting. All right. And what I
Well,
haven't
that
enjoyed
definitely
about,
helps.
right? Like for instance, like you could play Talislanta in anything. The system doesn't really matter that much. It's the
No, but
setting
it's
that
a
makes it.
matter of you could run it in GURPS, for example, but then you'd have to sit down and build all that stuff in GURPS, right? That's a lot of legwork. There's what, 80 races in Talislanta, something like that.
We'll talk.
So I'm just saying, great setting, by the way, very cool, a great Vancian setting that isn't garbage. Let me put it that way.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. And and to me, that's the thing that's most vital about it. The only shame about Talislanta is that he never I forget the guy's name. He
Stephen Michael Secchi
Yeah, and Noah
and the Wells.
he never wrote books. If he had written books in that universe, it might have taken off greatly because that's
Maybe, maybe. I mean, there were other examples of writers that did write books. Some of whom really hit, like Ray Feist, for example. Right?
fiction tie-ins work really
Yeah,
well with that sort of thing. That's all I'm
the
saying.
fiction's got
Yeah,
to be at least okay, though, right?
right.
I mean, and there's also the barriers for some properties are higher than others. M.A.R. Barker wrote 2 novels published through Daw about Tecumseh, and didn't do that well, right?
Yeah.
Daw pushed that first one hard. By the second one, I think Don Walheim had passed or retired or something, and Betsy Walheim had taken over. And apparently, Betsy didn't care for M.A.R. Barker
Well, Secchi
much.
and Bart. Well, there are a lot of
Oddly,
reasons.
maybe there
There,
were reasons. Who knows?
a lot of reasons not to care for Barker. But the bottom line, I think, with him and Secchi is I don't know. I've never seen Secchi try to write fiction.
No,
From
me
what I've heard,
neither. Oh,
from
the
what
little
I
tidbits in the books, but other than that,
my vibe there is like some people are great world builders and they're not great writers.
oh yeah, sure.
That was certainly the case with Barker. The
Yeah,
novel
yeah.
they weren't good. They weren't like I never read his books, so
I did.
I'll
I've read
say
them all actually.
are they
Well,
good?
except the Nazi one.
Right?
They're
Are they good
okay.
as
The first one's
books?
okay. The second one's actually Flame Song is actually better, but it's very sort of Burroughsian, right? It's very, very inspired by that sort of 1920s, 30s, 40s pulp fantasy.
Okay,
But in that context, I actually thought it was decent.
so let me ask you a question. If you were you were stuck in a prison cell and someone gave you one of Barker's books or said, "Hey, here's here's a bunch of Elsprague Camp Krishna. What are you going to read?
I've never read that stuff by DeCamp. I'd be tempted to read that. I've read all the fiction from M.A.R. Barker. I read all 5 or 6 or whatever it was. The later ones where he's basically self-publishing through Joe Zatola, where he had no editor or no filter, not very good. So I'd be delighted to give Elsprague DeCamp's non-Conan stuff a shot. I've read some Elsprague DeCamp non-fiction books, but I don't think I've ever read any of his fiction that didn't say Conan on the cover, I believe.
I don't think he's a great writer. You know what I mean? Like he's not. He's inevitably always going to get compared to Howard.
In that context, yeah,
right?
And maybe overall now, because that's really what he's best known for.
But he's a competent writer. Like you read it and it keeps you going. Yeah, sure. That sort of thing.
He had a fabulous beard too, by the way.
That's what I mean by
like
some people are world builders who literally can't propel forward a plot. Keep you involved. Engage you with characters. It's just they're different skills.
Yeah.
But
now, on the other hand, I think honestly, I have some fondness for like the Dragonlance novels too, right? The Margaret Weiss, Tracy Hickman, that original Dragonlance trilogy. I read that and enjoyed it at that level as a kid. I am positive that if I picked those things up now, I would consider them fucking trash. I could be wrong, but I'm not. I'm insufficiently motivated to give it a shot. Terry Brooks is another one. I enjoyed those as a young teenager, the original trilogy, and then later in my late 20s or something like that, I went to pick up some of the later Shannara books, and I'm like, ugh, this guy sucks.
So the Dragonlance, I at 14 read one book, didn't like it.
Mm-hmm.
Terry, what's it?
Brooks.
Yeah, I read Terry Brooks, around 15, didn't like it. The other one was God bless America. Wrote the Riding a Pale Horse guy from
Piers Anthony?
Yes.
Okay. Not a fan of Piers Anthony.
Correct. They were all as a teenager, they all hit me as crap. I'll tell you what I didn't like about Dragonlance was pretty simple. I thought that the Gully Dwarves and the Kinder were stupid.
I mean, everybody agrees with you, Pat.
Right, but you could never keep me going in anything if it had stupid.
It was only it's a matter of how willing to put up with stupid are you.
Right, and
I didn't like the gnomes in Dragonlance either, as I recall. So, or maybe that was the Gully Dwarves that I'm thinking. I forget. It's not that interesting of a setting outside. This is worth it a deeper explanation. Actually, is why Dragonlance works as a setting and why it doesn't work. I thought it worked pretty well in the context of that story that it was set up to tell, and every other attempt that they've had to tap into that material has been very flat at best.
As a role-playing setting, that was when I started to just not care about Dungeons and Dragons anymore. I wasn't interested in playing these archetypal heroes and going through someone's rat maze.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Towards the end of a plot, I was interested in playing in a campaign, whatever that campaign is, where we're developing our characters.
Mm-hmm.
And by interacting with what the GM's doing with their setting, developing the world. So when TSR specifically started to get into story arcs and selling those, that's what interests me the least in TTRPG from then to this day.
So I mean, and this has been a backbone of Paizo and Pathfinder too, with the adventure paths. And this is not to say that a lot of those aren't cool. I've actually got kind of a bunch of them, and they're pretty cool. But I'd never like sit down and we are going to run Rise of the Rune Lords. No, I mean, I might take stuff out of those things, but I'd completely rebuild them. Because to me, the following a predetermined plot. I mean, this is a taste thing, right? Some people like to say this is the story, and if you can get players behind that, great, have fun with that. That's not my style. I much prefer to say, here is the landscape, and together we are going to discover this story. I am your host, Mr. Rourke, right? And this is Fantasy Island. I riff off what the players, and I haven't GM'd anything in years, unfortunately, but I mean, I would constantly riff off what the players were doing, and I leaned into games that better enabled that, right? That's one reason why we played so much Ars Magica, because I had self-motivated players at the time that I would say, okay, here's what's going on. Here are the various things and rival wizards and evil forces or whatever was going on. What would you like to do this season? And they would come up with something. Okay, I'm going to go and talk to the evil wizard in the tower up here. Okay, cool. We'll do that. And then I want to go. It's work in my lab. Okay, well, what does your other character want to do, right? Because it's a character pool system. So I let them steer that. I did that in Harn too, where it's actually really, which is a great setting that's really easy to do that in because there's no meta plot. It's 100% meta plot free. Here's some stuff. This is what's going on. Off you go. It's all yours.
The Multaha exploration campaign.
Yeah,
I mean,
very much.
Right. I can't conceive the thing in the hobby, the TTRPG hobby, that interests me the least, both as a player and as a GM, is the predetermined story arc.
Yeah.
Okay. It just always has been.
Yeah. Again,
right?
if that works for you, fine. Go do that.
Now, like you were saying, like that doesn't mean in this campaign I'm running, I'm not going to take hey, I can take this module and stick it into this hex. Yeah, you know what I'm saying? And people get there, and you know what?
Well, yeah, maybe you can. I mean, but that's a situational thing. You're not sticking an entire. Maybe you are sticking an entire story arc, but if you make it fit, you're still going to make adjustments to it, even if that's on the fly, to make it fit into your environment and the arc of what the characters are doing, the character's story. I have long railed against, and I think White Wolf was the most obvious banner bearer for it's a storytelling experience. The game master is the storyteller. I really object to that piece of terminology, actually. And I understand that this isn't necessarily what they meant, but that's how it got taken by a lot of people.
Correct.
It's not the game master's story. It's everybody's story at the table. And I think I like to embrace that, right? I like individual players to take their individual characters and do interesting things, and then that drives, and then my character is, as the game master, is the world. Okay, correct. So in that sense, and then there's a set of mechanics, whether it's detailed or not or whatever, between the two to help mediate everything and how everything works. Right. I like to lean into that. I've always been a fan of. I mean, if I was going to run D&D, right, like presumably at gunpoint or duct taped to a chair somewhere in a basement.
That's how you'd run it. Right.
Yes, I would. I would say, okay, fine. Here's a big hex map. Here's a little village that you start in. Go explore. And in this hex there's an orc tribe, and in this hex there's a ruined temple, and in this hex there's a weird thing on a mountain, and whatever. Go find stuff. And then there would be characters that would be kind of operating in that space too, and you would interact with them, and those interactions might drive the story. There would be rumors, for example, which is a thing that is a very old school thing. You have, okay, well, you're in the tavern in this this little mining camp, and you overhear blah 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 about the lost silver mine of blah 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 blah, blah, right, whatever. And then that becomes a story seed that maybe they say, oh, let's go check that out. Or maybe 6 months later, in real time, they say, did we hear something about a silver mine? I'm going to check into that because we could really use some silver right about now.
So in the campaign I'm running, as you know, the characters left Gentibus, my God, May last year.
Yeah,
real time. Okay, and they knew that there was a previous expedition that had found a village and looted a tomb and left, and then there was some a disease or something like that. They had this information. They got to Multaha and started exploring. They didn't follow up. That was basically a seed. They didn't start to follow up on that until a month ago.
There are game masters who will get super frustrated. It's like, they didn't follow my plot hook. I'm like, that's awesome. You guys went and did something I didn't expect.
Right.
And I'm completely comfortable with that kind of creative extrapolation as a game master of me saying, oh, okay, I know what's going on over here where they went. I I can work with that. Cool.
Of course. Now, to them, it didn't come up. I'll say this: I inject so much detail into things, and I inject a lot of So they had somebody that they had known who had accompanied the expedition, who was part of that original expedition. They had an account. You know what I mean? Of it. So a lot of the game that I play in my campaign is they frequently have so many materials that they all seem of equal value.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes they are and sometimes they aren't. You know what I mean? Like, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that they're making a right choice or a wrong choice. It's just, I feel like if all I had was that one adventure seed, well, of course they're going to do that. So I need to have them, like, as they arrive, there's like 6 things that they could possibly do, or 7,
Yeah.
or choose an 8th, and
Mhm.
and I'm hunky dory with that. But my point was, probably the most, on this empty map, the only marked locations that were on it, right? You know what I'm saying? Of this place that this region they were going to, which was the most obvious adventure seed, was the thing that they're only like, they're like, oh shit, let's check that out, a year later in campaign time. I mean, in real time, I should say. And yes, there are interesting threads to pull there, right? About other things that might be going on, but that's okay. It's more important, like you said, I think, to, like, it's just my style. I prefer the sandbox style. I'd rather have, this is a world that exists,
Mhm.
and it's, the world is doing its thing, and you go out and engage it. Um, it's going to be interesting, which we'll talk about probably in a future episode. This espionage, World War II espionage commando campaign,
Very
where I'm
exciting.
where I'm trying to make it a little more story structured, merely because I think it suits the genre better.
There's actually ways to do that. I've done this too. I think I've told you about the Jovian Chronicles campaign that I ran that was basically modeled after Mission Impossible. Never did we actually have a mecha in the game, by the way. We didn't get that far with this. We got like 3 missions in or something like this. But it was a mission oriented thing. But because it's an RPG and it's persistent characters and a persistent setting, there's gonna be an overarching thing where you say, "Hey, this is the mission. You're gonna go do the mission. Maybe you'll shit the bed on the mission. That is a thing that can
Right.
happen, right? But then you go back to base or whatever, and then you deal with that, right? So
Like,
that's okay. If you have an that's just episodic, right?
correct.
Maybe
Correct.
TV. Thinking about this, I've given no thought to this. It just occurred to me. Maybe the structure of TV, which used to be very episodic in almost every case, but now is in almost every case this sort of arc-based narrative where you have a story that goes on from show to show to show to show over the course of the life of the series. That's much more common now than it used to be. And I wonder if that's had an impact
Well, and
on how people view this in the context of RPGs.
the flip side is, it's going to be episodic, but it's still, the basics are, you guys are going to do a thing. You've got a mission you've
Right.
been tasked with.
Yeah, but let's say we go
That-
on the mission and I decide, oh, the mission is in Madrid. I'm gonna fuck my character says, fuck the mission. I'm gonna assassinate Franco since we're here, Now you're gonna be able to roll with that, right? You're gonna be like, whoa, but then you're gonna be able to roll with that.
There will be consequences.
I'm just saying, if you send us
Right.
to Madrid, shit might go down.
Right. What I'm saying, though, is, like, regardless, you still take the approach of, this is the mission. It's a much more structured, like, why the characters are together, what's going on. But
Yeah.
the same approach is like, this is what the Italians, the Germans, the Japanese, the whoever, right? This is what's occurring. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
How you get after it, the world continues.
This is actually a really interesting point because the fundamental necessity of running a campaign like this is whoever's running it, whoever's guiding that story. I like story guide as a term, by the way.
Oh, it sounds
Needs
so...
to understand. It is a bit pretentious, but I think it's also relatively accurate. Needs to kind of understand and have the grasp on the environment, the landscape, the setting, in order to be able to fluently riff off of it, right? An interesting advantage that, say, you and I might have in we're running a campaign set in the context of World War II is, we kind of have a pretty good understanding of what went down, right?
Right.
So it's not like, yes, you do some additional reading, but it's not like you're coming in cold. It's like, who was in charge of Czechoslovakia in 1940? I'm not sure. I got to look that up. You don't need we don't need to look that up, right?
Correct.
So
Correct. But that's like, I think fundamentally then as a GM, you're talking about like, well, what suits your talents, what doesn't suit your
sure,
talents.
that's
You know, don't pick a style, don't pick a theme that either your own talents or your style
mhm,
like doesn't fit.
right.
Or you don't have extensive knowledge of.
And I'll
Um,
also mention and I think maybe we should wrap with. Obviously I'll let
sure,
you answer, but maybe we should wrap with this. Is that I am much more comfortable kind of thinking on the fly and doing that kind of extrapolation within the context of the setting, in the context of the story, than I am making my own mechanics up as I go. I'd rather have a mechanical foundation that I think is good enough for me to not have to think about that. And that way I can concentrate on what the characters are doing and how the world is reacting to them.
it's one of the reasons what you're describing is one of the reasons why for most, not all, but most things, I prefer GURPS.
Well, yeah,
Why?
it's certainly solid.
I can always throw mechanics out. What's difficult is trying to import mechanics in. So a game that's not sufficient mechanically, I'm far more comfortable in being able to present a more consistent methodology to the players of how we're dealing with
Right.
things.
Yep.
And I think it's more difficult to do when we're just like, let's make it up as we go along.
Yeah, let's run everything by fiat. To me
Right.
that I hate that because it leads to inconsistencies, which even if your players aren't telling you they're noticing, right?
Right.
It leads to a loss, in my opinion, a loss of verisimilitude in the experience of the campaign.
Correct. Correct.
So maybe your
So
campaign's not about that. Maybe your campaign's just I want to get to the next level, get more hit points, get more magic items and stuff like that. And that's fine if that's your thing. Cool. I don't think it works for me.
yeah, and I think campaigns are always fundamentally about that stuff. It's not as well. It's not just it's just instead of being expressed as a level. So it's funny, after the first 6 months of the Multaha campaign, I did a survey monkey of the players, right? Send a survey out to them.
You sent an actual monkey to the players.
Yes,
That
it
would be
was
awesome.
Spider Monkey.
What's this
The
monkey doing here? What the fuck?
yeah, please answer these questions about this role playing campaign you're in.
A monkey with a
Yeah.
clipboard.
With the hat, and then gives them a clipboard. No, but seriously, they came back with the same. Some people wanted more mystery. Some people still want the same things. It's just in that game, it's not neatly expressed as leveling up,
Yes.
right? Or but they wanted the same things. And the funny thing is, most of the stuff they all wanted, because of the nature of it being so sandboxy, was like, well, then go do it.
Hmm.
Like stuff they not that they were upset, but like stuff like, well, man, I wish there was more like action. I wish there was more combat, and I wish we were like out there getting more magical stuff,
Hmm.
like seeing what's happening in this world. It's like, well, all right, so go fight people. That's they were being very cautious. It's how they were approaching their expedition
Hmm.
was impacting those things, because the world just exists. What fundamentally, mechanically, at the end of the day, they were just getting the results of like, okay, so you have a very determined idea that you want to go from point A to point B to do a thing. And then we're seeing what happens with random encountering tables on the way there and the way back. If you need to get off the beaten path, instead of trying to go trade with the Kalaku people for nutmeg,
Hmm.
if you want something more exciting than that, then don't go try to trade with them for nutmeg.
Right.
Which you could do.
Yes.
There's money to be made there, but that's about the choice. So with that, I think we're kind of done, right, man?
Yes. So I'll remind people it's good to be back. We'd like to stay back. So the best way to make us come back is to like the video and get it to hit the algorithm and make the algorithm fairies happy. So, but in the meantime, did we have any actual questions? We had a lot of comments.
We
I
had
didn't want
comments,
to
but no,
derail us
we didn't.
with just comments other than highlighting them.
We didn't have any questions.
I
so
didn't see any
that's
either.
it. That's it.
So, but I would like to thank everybody for coming by, and hopefully it won't be another 3 months before we do another one of these. So, and we got plenty to talk about. It's almost like we got opinions or something. Strangely enough.
Everybody have a good Sunday. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you again next time.
All right.